Hey, it's Dustin. Hope everybody's having a great evening. It is the third day before the resurrection of Christ. And being the third day before the resurrection, I'd like to start us each evening reading about the events that led up to the resurrection. You see, things had to take place. In order for Christ to rise from the dead, he had to be dead and be buried, and for him to overcome death, he first had to be killed. On this third day before the resurrection, this is a day that I cannot even fathom. As I go back through and read the gospel accounts of Christ's death, it's very emotional for me to think that somebody would die in the way he did for me. And not just die, but the way he was beaten and mocked and had that crown of thorns pressed into his head. I hope that we could take a moment and really remember what that death was like for Christ. It was gruesome. It was excruciatingly painful. Yet he willingly did it for you and for me. And that is so sad, yet so encouraging at the same time. I'd like to read this evening from Luke 23, starting in verse 33, regarding the death of Christ. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by watching. But the ruler scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up, offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." As I picture in my mind my King, God's Son, hanging on that tree, the blood from the crown of thorns dripping across his face, his hands, and his feet, bleeding from the nails that were driven through them, hanging him there. It's very sobering to think that he did that for me, for my wife, and for my kids, for my dad, for my neighbor, for my mom, for my family, for you. If you skip down to verse 44, he says, "It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' And having said this, he breathed his last." Salvation's wondrous plan was done, as we sing in that song. I hope that it hasn't become too normal for you and for me as we think about the death of Christ. I know sometimes we hear something over and over and over again as we talk about it every first day of the week, as we gather around the table with our brothers and sisters, communing and remembering the death of Christ. I hope that it never loses its impact when we read what Christ did for us. I hope you take a moment to remember the death of Christ tonight and every night, every day. As we talk about these events that lead up to the resurrection of Christ, let us remember the excruciating death that Christ died for you, that in 3 days he will overcome. I hope that gives us hope. I hope that humbles us. I hope that it brings a tear to our eye and a smile to our face, realizing what the death of Christ means.